to mitzvah number 4 of the Sefer HaChinuch. We skipped over mitzvah number 3 for now. Mitzvah number 3 is the Isra of Gid Hanasha. We'll come back to that when we talk again about Isurim of Achila. That's where the Minchas Chinuch spends a lot of time discussing all the different shiurim of what is eating and what isn't eating. But we did a lot of that when we did Hilchas Pesach. So I thought it would be kedai to talk about something that really influences our lives a tremendous amount, probably more than any other mitzvah in many ways. The mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh affects our lives like enormously, as almost as a backdrop to our lives. Now, of course, many mitzvahs affect us in many ways, but Kiddush HaChodesh is a mitzvah that we probably think about never, that affects our lives all the time. And understanding where it comes from, what it is, and the details of it are going to be essential. But at least for the first round here tonight, we're going to take a look at what the Sefer HaChinuch says. And then in the next couple of weeks, we'll do the Minchas Chinuch on different pieces and details of it. Says the Sefer HaChinuch as follows: Mitzvah Kiddush HaChodesh. The mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh is lekadesh chodashim, is to sanctify, to somehow or another make holy the chodashim, the months. Ula'aber shanim, and to make I think the official translation of la'aber shanim is to make an iber year, right? To make leap years. So it's to be mekadesh the chodesh and to make leap years. Where bebeis din gadol b'chachma samuch ba'aretz. So there are a number of important details here, says the Sefer HaChinuch. It has to be in a beis din, which is a beis din gadol. Based in Gadol b'Chachma, with wisdom. Samuch, they need to have smicha, right? They need to have smicha. Ba'aretz, and it has to be in Eretz Yisrael. What's up, Sam? We just started them, so you are good to go. Says the Sefer HaChinuch, you need based in Gadol b'Chachma. They need to be wise, meaning, and we'll talk about the qualifications of what wisdom is necessary. They need to have smicha, and they need to be in Eretz Yisrael. And then to establish the Yom Tov, all of the different holidays, in accordance with that Kiddush HaChodesh. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, this is the pasuk about which Rashi says, why don't the Torah start here? HaChodesh hazeh lachem rosh chodashim. This month is the head of all months for you. Okay. Kaloimar, which means, kshethiru chidusha shel levana, when you see the new moon, you are going to need to establish this for yourself as the beginning of the month. Now, this is interesting. Even if you don't see it. Even if you don't see it. Why wouldn't you see it? It's cloudy, right? So, what, like all of Torah falls apart because it's cloudy? That would be very bad. But if you don't see it, says the Sefer HaChinuch, Mikevan shehi re'uya lehera'os al pi ha'cheshbon hamakubal. It's okay so long as it could show up now in accordance with the calculation that we accept and understand. So there's two elements to this. There's the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, which is by the Beis Din Gadol in Yerushalayim through seeing it, and we'll discuss the halachas of seeing it. And then it's also by Beis Din Gadol, b'Chachma Samach, ba'aretz, but not seeing it. Those are the two methodologies that we have. V'chein tichlal mitzvah zu, mitzvahs Ibur Hashana. And within this mitzvah is also the mitzvah of Ibur Hashana, of creating a leap year. And we're going to get into some astronomy and some mathematics. Not too much, but you're going to need to understand a little bit about sun, moon, and earth physics. Why? Says the Sefer HaChinuch, Lefi she'yesod mitzvahs Kiddush HaChodesh, because the foundation of this mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh is Kedei she'yasu Yisrael ma'adei Hashem b'ma'adam, so that the Jewish people do the Yom Tovim at the right time. What does that mean? And this is the same reason that you have the mitzvah of creating leap years. It is all to make sure that the Yom Tovim happen in the right time. Ve'ula milvad zeh hamikra, but aside from this pasuk of HaChodesh hazeh lachem, there are other psukim that tell us these things. Bo ha'aros b'ksuvei ha'torah yora al mitzvos eber. There's other mitzvahs that tell us, other psukim that tell us about this mitzvah. V'hu ma'shekasav v'shamarta es ha'chokah hazos lo mo'yada. You need to keep this chag in accordance with its time. That's talking about Korban Pesach. V'chein, the pasuk also says in the Dvarim, Shmar es chodesh aviv. Hold on to safeguard the month of spring. Now, we're going to get into some of the details of this in a moment, and according to the Rambam and the Ramban, how many mitzvahs are we talking about here? But just very practically speaking, and we'll see this inside, but we'll say it outside first. There are a number of different ways that Jews keep time, or that people kept time. Right? The notion of a watch or a clock is very new. Right? Very new was probably, as we know of time today, that was like an invention of the railway lines. Meaning people were keeping track of time, but keeping track of time as specifically as we keep track of time today was because railway lines needed to have coordination. Meaning that was the first time that human beings were traveling faster than the speed of the day. That was when people discovered, or at least experienced time zones. Otherwise, it's never, meaning a human being can only travel at the speed of the earth spinning. We don't go much faster than that. But on a train, you could, right? In a train, you could go back in time, in theory, right? You could go forwards in time. Now, we know all of this with regards to plane travel today, but practically speaking, how do people keep time? So there are three major systems that people use to keep time, and they have nothing to do with each other. Nothing. There is the day cycle. The day cycle is, how do you define a day? Sun goes up and sun goes down, right? Sort of, right? Sort of. Sun goes up and sun goes down is more or less, depending on how you want to describe sun up and sun down, right? Meaning in halacha, we have different definitions. We've got alas hashachar, and we have that's when the first light pops over the horizon, and then there's Netzach Hama, when the sun is above the horizon, and then sunset is either when the sun is no longer visible, or when the sun begins to set, or when the light of the sun is no longer visible after the sun has set. So there's different definitions for that. The Ibn Ezra points out in Torah that the word yom could mean, in the Torah, it means about 5 different things, depending on the context. Meaning, we speak about this, and we use context, although sometimes it gets confusing. But we use the same word day to describe a lot of different things. Day could be 24 hours. Day could be daytime, 12 hours, right? Day could be the working day. Yeah, go for it. Day could be the working, right? I'll get this to you by the end of the day. What does that mean? 5 p.m., right? Meaning we have different words. We have different words, different usages of the same word. It's all the same word, day, but
there's also the theory of duration for each day, especially the first, day.
Right, we're much longer, right? So, but even in our vernacular, right? Like, what does that mean? Like, what is the word yom in the Torah? It means lots of different things. And Chazal have drashos explaining like where and when and how we understand this. Okay, so there is the cycle of the day. The day is, at least from sunrise to sunrise or sunset to sunset, we count our days more or less from sunset to sunset. Those can vary, right? That meaning depends on more or less what season and whether the days are getting longer, getting shorter. Your day will be off by it could be off by a minute here, a minute there every day. It's not exactly 24 hours. Okay, so that's the day cycle. Astrologically speaking, or astronomically speaking rather, the length of a day is the rotation of the earth on its axis, right? That's the length of a day. Yes? Good. What is a month? That's the moon, right? That is the moon going from new moon to new moon, right? The moon waxes and wanes. So you have new moon, it gets bigger, bigger until full moon, and then it gets smaller until it disappears, right? That is a lunar month, literally month meaning moon. The orbit or the spin of the Earth on its axis has nothing to do with the lunar orbit. Nothing. There's nothing tying these two events together. And then we speak about a year. So
does the moon spin though?
The moon does spin, but it spins together with the Earth.
Right.
It's gravitationally locked, which is why we always see the same side.
Right. If it didn't spin and the Earth spin, then it would have like some level of relation.
Right. So it is gravitationally locked. The Earth and moon are always facing each other, meaning it moves along with the Earth. But the length of a day and the length of a month have nothing to do with each other from an astronomical perspective. And then you have a year. What's a year? Now, this is a little interesting. We define a year as, right, as the Earth going around the sun. But that's from our perspective, because we have telescopes and satellites and stuff. But 500 years ago, how would they define a year? But how do you know that?
They're in the same place every time.
12 months doesn't really help you. So seasons kind of helps you, but seasons are not right. Seasons are a little bit unclear. So how do you define a solar year? What does that mean?
Certain constellations in the sky. Obviously, I have no idea, but I imagine that depending on where we are in the circuit around the sun, we probably have certain constellations that are witnessed in the sky.
They appear not in the sky.
Yeah.
I don't have them really. No, you're right. Exactly.
I have no
I don't
idea.
have them
So-
in the sun. Like I know they.
I'm sure that like there's certain certain times of the year, they say, oh, this time of year you can see little dot, whatever, big dot, or big.
Right.
in the sky.
The big schnitzel in the sky. That's
Alright.
right. Exactly. Big schnitzel. Baruch Hashem. Tachlis, let's just in the world of the Kadmonim, we're talking about from you see this in the Mishnayos and you see the Gemaras and the Rishonim. There are 12 mazalos, constellations, that make up the backdrop of the night sky. Meaning the stars of the constellations are in fixed position relative to each other. Meaning they always show up in that formation together. And at different times in the year, constellations will rise. You'll be able to see that constellation, and then you will stop seeing it, meaning night after night after night, you will see that constellation moving through the sky. So if you would imagine you are sitting inside of a ball, and the ball is spinning around you, and you're facing in one direction, so you would see basically this backdrop of constellations moving around you. That's probably the simplest way of explaining it. Now, of course, the math and astronomy and astrology are all much more complicated than that. But practically speaking, from the experiential end of it, you would witness the constellations moving through the sky annually, more or less. Now, in addition to 12 constellations, the Kadmonim describe what they refer to as Shiva Kochvei Lechet, 7 walking stars. Walking stars. What do we mean by walking stars? Is in addition to the constellations, which are fixed relative to each other, there are other celestial bodies that move through them. They are not fixed relative to the constellations. They move independent of the constellations. What are the Shiva Kochvei Lechet? Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Those are the Shiva Kochvei Lechet. That's as much as you can see with the naked eye. More than that.
Are those named in any way?
Yeah, we have Hebrew names for them. Yeah, for sure. So those Shiva Kochvei Lechet, those 7 celestial bodies, move through the constellations. A calendar year, a solar year, up until modern understanding of science and physics and whatnot, a calendar year was the point in time that the sun returns to its same place in the constellations.
As the sun being constellations, that's what I'm connection.
Meaning, the sun rises and sets every day. The constellations move around. At some point in time, the sun will set in the place that this constellation appears. It's the same, on top of the same mountain in the distance. Once the sun has returned to setting on top of that mountain on the day that that constellation rises, that's a year.
So what did you mean by those celestial bodies moving freely through the constellation?
Meaning,
Or did you mean that they were actually fixed in place?
no, they are not.
No.
Relative to the constellations, they move. The constellations all move together.
What do you call the sun?
The sun is not part of any constellation.
No, right, but the celestial bodies, I'm saying.
Right.
The sun is, that's questioning myself. Is the sun always going to rise in one place? And
Yes.
set in the same exact place?
On the same day of the year, the sun will rise in the same place.
Maybe I just haven't noticed that it's setting in a slightly different place.
Sets in a slightly different place every day.
Last time you were up sunrise.
That's it rises,
6:30 here. It's like,
which is why there are certain monuments in the ancient world and even today that you can get a perfect shadow on a particular day. Meaning at a particular time, at a particular day, you can get like a perfect shadow. There's Stonehenge, effectively work like that.
modern day New York City.
Right, Manhattanhenge, right? There's one day that you can get that the sun shines exactly perpendicular to the New York City grid, and
So cool.
everybody with a camera is out there trying to take a picture of it, right?
This is all understanding that the sun is revolving around the earth and not the earth revolving around
It's irrelevant.
It just appears in the same
Meaning,
place.
from our perspective, that's what it looks like.
Yeah, now also you being in the center and you're like looking right as far as where the sun rises and sets. Are you physically pointing looking in the same direction for that constellation when it reappears the next
Yes.
year? And the rest of the constellations are going to appear somewhere out
Yeah,
in the circumference overall.
Yeah.
So basically, so the year is basically just one that appears. When any constellation appears in that area of the sky where you hadn't seen it for a year.
right.
Okay.
So that's a calendar, and people can mark it to the day, right? Meaning the day that the sun sets over there and Aries is over there. That only happens once a year. By tomorrow, it'll be off, right? So you have your natural landmark in the distance. That mountain has been there since, my Alta, Bobby and Zaidi, right?
Now this is confusing only because that
Natural landmarks could change in theory.
No, because a year is 354 days in the lunar year versus whether or not you have leap years. Or
Yeah.
whether or not you have.
Yeah.
The modern Jewish calendar is a work of art.
So that's what we're going to start talking about here, because we're going to need to
Very
get there.
confusing.
Practically speaking, we know today, and by the way, when Chazal did these calculations, and we have this in Talmud Bavli and Sefer Rosh Hashanah, the calculations of Shmuel, the Amora Shmuel, are within nanoseconds of NASA. Wow. Like, it's cool. It's cool. And we'll see some of the stuff. But Tachlis, we have a problem because the constellations also have nothing to do with the moon. Right? But roughly, each constellation moves through the sky every about 30 days-ish. Every about month-ish. Now, again, you can see it going from there to there. There'll be more than one constellation in the sky. It's which one is where in the sky.
So they don't break up evenly necessarily. Constellations
No.
take up the year, night sky.
Yes. the challenge of understanding the calendar without modern timekeeping instruments is that the day, the month, and the year are all physical, astronomical phenomena that have nothing to do with each other. On a physical level, there's nothing astronomical tying these events together. Which means that in order to have a calendar, you need to connect these things. You need to keep some kind of time. So if you want to keep a lunar calendar, glatt lunar calendar, that's easy. A lunar calendar is X amount of months, and on month number whatever, you will observe whatever you observe. Muslims keep a lunar calendar, which is why Ramadan shifts every year. Right? Ramadan shifts about 10 days every year. So sometimes Ramadan is the middle of the winter, and sometimes Ramadan is in the middle of the summer. And that's tough.
And the 10 times are 9 months apart.
Right?
So
These things are right, because if it's a purely lunar calendar, it has got nothing to do with the sun or the seasons. Gregorian calendar is a purely solar calendar. It has nothing to do with the moon. The moon is like a curious oddity in the sky as far as the Gregorian calendar is concerned. There's nothing that the moon does. The moon doesn't keep time at all. The Jewish calendar is both lunar and solar, because Rosh Chodesh is declared by seeing the moon, and the seasons are based on the solar year, because that's true, right? That's just the reality. The sun rising and setting, and the Earth orbiting in an elliptical orbit around the sun means that we have seasons. So if you want to have Pesach in Chodesh Aviv, and Rosh Chodesh Nisan is based on the moon, you got a problem. Practically speaking, the solar year, we calculated today to be 365 and just under a quarter days. Not, I mean, colloquially people say 365 and a quarter, but that's not entirely true. That's why on a millennium we don't have a leap year, even though it's divisible by 4. That's the extra percentage points. And the lunar year is 354 days. So you've got 10 and a bit days in between the lunar calendar and the solar calendar. Good. That's the astronomy background. Let's take a look inside. Second paragraph here. You didn't think that you were coming for a science class, but kacha, that's basics. That's basics. You need that before you can even start talking here. It says, Ve'inya ha-mitzvah. This mitzvah, what is it? It says, Shabaim shnei Yisraelim kasherim lifnei beis din. 2 good, upstanding kosher Jews are going to come in front of Beis Din, and they testify, we saw the new moon, right? We saw the moon in its newness. And they say, it must be Rosh Chodesh. Today's Rosh Chodesh. They say, today is Mekudesh. Now, important detail, just that because of this, the din is, if you forgot to say Yalav V'Yava at Mariv or on Rosh Chodesh, you do not repeat the Shemona Esrei. Why? Because there's no Kiddush HaChodesh until tomorrow. So we know, because we've calculated already, that tonight is Rosh Chodesh. But in the Beis Din, they would only know that tonight is Rosh Chodesh tomorrow. Right? That's more complicated when it comes to Rosh Hashanah. That's why Rosh Hashanah is always 2 days. Yes. There's some irony. We'll get to the mitzvah of Kiddush Levana a little bit later here. But no, I mean, it's not in the Ikar mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. But Rosh Hashanah was the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah described was particularly complicated over Rosh Hashanah in Yerushalayim, because you woke up in the morning of Rosh Hashanah and you blew shofar, but it might not have been Rosh Hashanah. If people came and they said, we saw the moon, so then today was Rosh Hashanah. And if not, it wasn't. You blow shofar tomorrow. So Rosh Hashanah was always 2 days because of that. Because it's Rosh Chodesh. Okay, so he says, "V'tam she'ein mitzvah zu ela b'smuchin." How come you need smicha? Now, what do you mean by needing smicha? In order to be on this basin, you have to have smicha. So what does that mean? You need smicha. You have to be a rabbi. So we can do it today, right? No. It's not nice to say, but not me and not any other rabbi that you've ever met has smicha.
Different standings.
We don't have smicha. What we have is called the heter hara. We are allowed to issue halachic rulings. Real smicha is the unbroken chain from Moshe Rabbeinu to Yeshua, to the Sekenim, to the Nevi'im, to the Anshe Knesset Gdola. Smicha, as we know it today, is not original smicha. It's gone. That chain has been broken. We do not have an unbroken chain of Rebbe to Talmud from Moshe Rabbeinu till any Rabbanim today. Now, we have many, many things. We have lots of dinim of Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh, and Rabbanim have a lot of authority, but not the same authority as we had when we had real smicha. You need smuchim. You need Rabbanim that have risen to the level that they can take over from Moshe Rabbeinu, effectively. We don't have that today. Original smicha we do not have, which means that we cannot put anybody to death. If we'd have a Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim today, we could not put anybody to death. We could not issue capital punishments or corporal punishments, no malchus either, and we can't make anybody pay fines. We can make people pay monetary loss, but not a fine. Knas, that we can judge monetary cases, but a fine that's imposed by the Torah that is in addition to, for example, if you kill somebody's slave, so then you pay 30 shkalim. You pay them 30 shkalim. That's not the cost of a slave. That is a fine. That's a knas. It's a penalty.
Do we know around when this chain was broken?
Yes, we're going to get there. We are going to get there. Okay, so
that's what you can't do anymore. You can't issue that $30
Yeah.
flat.
is there something rattling there?
I thought it was a dishwasher.
The heater,
It's
the
one
one
in the
heater on.
dishwasher.
See if you give that a zet. It's, yeah. Leave it. It's good. Something rattling around. Yeah. Okay. We'll fix that later. Shkoyach, thank you. Okay. So you need smuchim. What do you need smuchim for? It says lefi sheba beperish hachodesh hazeh lachem gedolim smuchim k'mo ischem. Because hachodesh hazeh lachem has to be for you. Who was it said to? It was said to Moshe and Aaron. So we need to have people that are like Moshe and Aaron, that have that level of authority in order to be able to do Kiddush HaChodesh. Now, we don't have that today.
You know if anyone bothered to keep track of the months before this mitzvah?
Yes.
Why?
So
Seasons.
Well, it's not seasons though, is it?
No, well, not just usually wanted to know.
So scientific, the knowledge of where things go, but to actually keep track of months. I mean, it doesn't play into your season. But it's just mess them up.
So
Not months, and how we think of months.
so in ancient Egypt, it's very clear that they did not use the moon.
Right, okay.
They didn't use the moon. What they used was calendars, was the solar calendar, and specifically the constellations. There's an interesting machlokas, Rashbam probably, although lav dafka it's machlokas, but they spell it out differently. By Korban Pesach, so the everybody knows that the Jews were supposed to shech the lambs because rams, because they were the Egyptian god, right? That was the Egyptian god. So that's how Rashi says it was the lamb itself that the Egyptians worshipped. The Rashbam and the Rambam say differently, that it wasn't the lamb itself that was a symbol. What they really worshipped was the constellation Aries. Because when Aries rose every year in the spring, the Nile overflowed. So that was the source of their prowess and economic power.
When they said Moshe Aaron, Chodesh Zel Cham Rosh Chodeshim, meaning, did they know what that was even? Meaning,
Yes.
Like, what was it used for before? Meaning, obviously, they were living hundreds of years in Egypt with no need to keep.
No, correct.
But presumably, it had some utility at some point.
Right.
Okay.
Meaning, it's possible that in ancient Egypt nobody cared about the lunar cycle at all, kind of like today.
Is there any indication that they cared about it?
I mean, in as much as we know that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov kept Torah in some way, right?
Okay.
I mean,
Only that one.
Chazal tell us that they kept all of the mitzvahs, which obviously doesn't mean that they kept all of the mitzvahs, because that would have been impossible, right?
Are our tides and water levels controlled by the moon, though?
Yes.
So was that misguided worship that they worshiped the constellation when in reality it might have been the position of the moon that was controlling the?
Oh, yeah. No, this was
Gravity.
all like, when this happens, that happens, therefore that causes that.
Gotcha, correlation. Okay.
Because of gravity.
Yeah.
I'm not. I'm saying
Right, but I don't know, yeah.
The moon has its own gravitational pull.
Right. I'm
so-
saying all these disaster films you see.
Right.
Falls, all.
Yeah, tsunami stuff.
Tsunami.
Right. I understand. So I never quite understood as far as how the
Gravitational
moon was
pull of the
But
moon.
aren't there other things that have a gravitational pull out there? Like the sun's gravitational pull, it's assuming overwhelmed the
Right,
effect.
you
of
would
the
think
moon.
like, certain moon should pull buildings down.
Or not have an effect over the sun's gravitational pull at all.
Right. Well, so
Great question. You
so-
can move the ocean with the moon, but you can't move a building.
Right, exactly.
so this is something important to understand in general. Since Copernicus, we know that the Earth revolves around the sun and not that the sun revolves around the Earth, and we know that the moon revolves around the Earth and not that the Earth revolves around the moon. Strictly speaking, that's not true. Strictly speaking, like from a very zoomed out perspective, the sun and Earth orbit each other.
Well, so from a physics perspective, technically there's no difference.
Right.
There's no
It's
real
relative.
legitimacy in one versus the other.
Meaning you have a very, very, very massive, meaning not large, but massive, has much mass, one body, and another body that has less mass. They exert a gravitational pull on each other, and the larger one is more at the center, and the smaller one is more outside. But think of it as when you swing around a kid, right? You pick up your kid and you swing around. So they are orbiting you, but you are also orbiting them, right? Meaning, strictly speaking, you are orbiting a point in between the two of you. Meaning, if you look at the solar system super duper zoomed out, you'll see everything dances around each other. So, yes, it is true that we could say, by and large, that the Earth revolves around the sun, but the sun also a little bit revolves around the Earth. Like, both of those things are, strictly speaking, true, because everything is exerting a gravitational pull on everything else. The tides, this is going to sound weird, but on a purely physical level, the moon doesn't really cause the tides. The moon is always exerting that gravitational pull on the ocean constantly, and and the oceans are bulging out in the direction of the moon. Always. The Earth spins within that. So if you would think about like a bubble that's filled with water, with some of it being pulled in one direction, the Earth spins within that. So we experience that as tides. But strictly speaking, that gravitational pull is constant. The oceans are always bulging, but because the Earth spins, it spins into and out of that bulge.
So these changes happen. So basically, all these natural events really have nothing. I mean, the moon's force are constant. Their spin is constant. I mean, these have nothing to do with anything as far as
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Makes more sense than
Yeah.
explained to me before.
So that's yeah, we're learning more about these things. Human beings have been staring up at the night sky for ever, and now we're like, hey, there's like everything that we don't know. So, kacha, you need to have smicha in order to do this, because you need to be like Moshe and Aaron. Good. Says the chinuch, yeah.
Wasn't there a comparison saying that the Bezin nowadays is always they try to compare, meaning the top Bezin nowadays is like the top Bezin in times of Shmuel.
We have Yiftach that Yiftach Badar Kishmol Badar. That yes. So we have a klal that you pass on based on the chachamim that you have in your generation.
Right. And that was specifically in reference to Bezin.
Yes.
So, like what I said here, so our Bezin today is equal to the Anshe Knesset Agol.
No. To the degree that they can issue rulings for our generation, yes. But the klal is ein based in general, ein based in Yochel Levatel, din based in Chaver, ela im ken gadol mimenu b'chachma b'minyan. You can't change anything that another based in did, unless. So,
The chain is regardless.
and the lack of smicha means that we don't have the same authority in these areas. Now, we'll talk about some of the historical points a little bit later on. People did attempt to remake the calendar. There was a major attempt at the end of the Gaonic period, and it was arguably the reason that Reb Saadia Gaon became the Gaon, meaning he became the leader of the Jewish community in Bavel as a result of him defending the calendar. That was probably the pivotal event of his ascension to leadership.
Standing against changes.
Yeah. If you pull that open, it'll stop beeping because,
You try to get rid of 3-day yontifs, didn't you?
no, you try to get rid of the Babylonian control over the calendar in Eretz Yisrael. He said, we're back in Eretz Yisrael. We should be able to remake the calendar because we're Ba'aretz. So Reb Saadia Gaon did not agree. We'll get to those details a little later. Okay, v'oid darshu hadavar. They also darshan this thing mida samach loy davar al kol adas bnei Yisrael, because right next to it says speak to the entirety of the children of Israel. Kolom sheyeh lahem la'osam sheyekadshu haChodesh rishus kol Yisrael. Kolom chachamim gedolim sheb'Yisrael. You're going based on God. It needs to not just be two individuals. It needs to be representative of the Jewish people. This is something that is affecting the entirety of the Jewish people. Meaning, there are certain mitzvahs that individuals do. That's probably a button not to press, but forget it. There's okay. There are certain mitzvahs that individuals do, certain mitzvahs that fathers do for their children, right? Bris Milah, I was speaking about that for the past few weeks. And then there's certain mitzvahs that are mitzvahs on the Jewish people. Mitzvahs that are on the Jewish people are done by the Beis Din. So this needs to be done as a representation of the entirety of the Jewish people. It needs to be said and dealt with by the whole Jewish people. Okay. Anybody that is a great chacham in the Jewish people and given smicha in Eretz Yisrael, and that smicha is the known smicha. Now, if you had somebody that got smicha in Eretz Yisrael, that was a legitimate Talmud Chacham in Eretz Yisrael, and had the authority of the Beis Din to do what, even in Chutz La'aretz, they could be Mekadesh the Chodesh. And the Gemara gives some examples. So long as there is nobody of that stature in Eretz Yisrael. This is how we found in Mesachas Brachos. Also, Kain Chanan ben Achi Rabbi Yeshua Akiva ben Yosef. There was one occasion that Hananiah, the son of the brother of Rabbi Yeshua, meaning Rabbi Yeshua's nephew, and Rabbi Akiva were Mekadesh the Chodesh outside of Eretz Yisrael, because they got smicha, they had real smicha outside of Eretz Yisrael. Inside of Eretz Yisrael, they were outside of Eretz Yisrael. There was nobody to be Mekadesh the Chodesh. They did it. It's good to point out that the difference in Gemara, the difference, you always know who had smicha and who didn't. How do you know? Rebbe versus Rav, right? In Eretz Yisrael, they had real smicha because you can only get real smicha in Eretz Yisrael. So they were called Rebbe. In Chutz La'aretz, no matter how great you were, you never got to be called Rebbe. You were only called Rav. So whenever you're learning Talmud Bavli, if you open up a Gemara and you see somebody's Rebbe Yochanan, you know he was Israeli, right? Rav Papa was Babylonian. In Mishnayos, everybody's a Rebbe because the Mishnayos were all in Eretz Yisrael. Right? Everybody in the Mishnayos had real smicha. After the death of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, so there were no Tanaim quoted from Babel. I mean, we have Babylonian Tanaim. The most famous of the Babylonian Tanaim was Hillel. Hillel Hazakin was a Babylonian. I mean, he was born in Babel. Most of his life he lived in Babel. He came to Eretz Yisrael, Aliyah Regel, in the days of the Beis HaMikdash. He was 80 years old. It was the second time that they'd been to Eretz Yisrael. And the Gemara Pesachim describes that they had a shaila in halacha and nobody could answer it. And Hillel answered it. They said, Taki, you're the God Ladar. So he became, he retired to Yerushalayim, and that's how you have Hillel, as he had smicha, real smicha. Okay, says the Chinuch like this: Aval bilti tanaim elu, but if you don't have these conditions, ein rishus l'shum adam yisrael likva chodashim la'av shonim. Nobody has the authority to establish the months or to make leap years. V'im teishal, and if you would ask, what's the obvious question? Im kain heach anu osim hayom. How are we doing this today? Right? How do we have any Yom Tovs? Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot. Where from? We don't have a Beis Din in Yerushalayim or in Eretz Yisrael. We don't have smicha today. How do we do this? He says, She'ein lanu chacham smuchim. We don't have smicha. That's the problem. We don't have smicha. He says, you need to know. Shikach kibalnu. This is our Kabbalah. So the Gemara says in Masechet Beitza. Rabbi Hillel Hanasi. Rabbi Hillel Hanasi. Who's Rabbi Hillel Hanasi? Benoy shel Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Now, who is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi? Who's Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi? The general editor of the Mishnah. That's not who we're talking about here. This is his grandson. He was also called Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, although in the Gemara they refer to him as Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, the Aramaic. Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, in order to differentiate him from his grandfather. After Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi died, so his son, Rabbi Gamliel, was the Rosh Yeshiva and was the Nasi, and after him was his grandson, named for the grandfather, Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya. His son was named Rabbi Hillel. That's Rabbi Hillel. That's Hillel the second, because that was all the same mishpacha from Hillel Hazaken. Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya's son, Hillel Hazaken, in the 3rd century, more or less. Shaya Gadol b'Darav Nismach ba'aretz. He was the biggest Talmid Chacham in Eretz Yisrael, and he had smicha, and he lived in Eretz Yisrael. So he had all 3 conditions. V'hu Chacham shetikin lanu cheshbon ha'ibur. He made the calendar. V'hu Kiddush HaChodesh v'ibur hashanim ha'asidim lavai ad sheyavai Eliyahu. And he was mekadesh all of the Chodashim. Meaning every time that we celebrate Rosh Chodesh, it did have a Kiddush HaChodesh. Meaning there's no din in the Torah that says that you have to be mekadesh the Chodesh every Chodesh. In theory, you could be mekadesh like a couple in advance. And that's what he did. I mean, a couple more than a couple, right? He was mekadesh all of the Chodashim forever until Eliyahu. Now, that point until Eliyahu comes is an important detail, because at some point in the next few hundred years, there will be enough movement in the celestial bodies that the calculation will break, because the length of a day, a month, and a year are all independent of each other on a astronomical level, and they shift slightly.
Oh, it helps with computers now.
Right, but
Because they can compensate for.
yes, and they do. But that's not going to help you for the halacha.
Correct.
Right?
Someone will still have to make a decision about it.
Right. So that's what he says, Ad Sheva Eliyahu, until Eliyahu, by that time, we'll be okay. Meaning by the year 6000, right? We will we'll have an answer of what to do. Right? We're gonna have to figure it out by then. So he says, "V'al zeh anu som chanaya." That's what we rely on today. He says, "Zeh she'amarnu al das harambam zal." This is all the sheet of the Rambam as we have discussed thus far. Everything we've said is the Rambam. The Sefer HaChinuch in general follows lock, stock with the Rambam. He says, "V'haramban zal." But what about the Ramban? And Sefer Mrs. Essay Kuf Nun Gimel. Yachshav Kiddush HaChodesh mitzvah achas v'Yerushalayim mitzvah achas. The Ramban says that there are two separate mitzvahs. There's one mitzvah is a mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, and another mitzvah is Yerushalayim. There are two separate independent mitzvahs of each other. Meaning in the count of 630 mitzvahs, they both agree that you need to do both. But what's the calculation of how many mitzvahs? So that they understand the Ramban writes that he holds that there's two separate mitzvahs. They're not one mitzvah. He provides the explanations in his Sefer HaMitzvahs, the Chen Ba'al Halachos, Gamken, and the Bahag holds like that as well. Fine. Says va'apasuk amor al mitzvahs ha'ibur, and the pasuk that tells you that you have to make an ibur chodesh, kolomar shenachashiv hatkufas kedei shenase amod mizman hakavu alahem. The pasuk that tells you that you need to make sure that the Yom Tovs fall out in their right months. That's the pasuk. You have to make sure that the months that the Yom Tovim work out in the right months. And the same thing is true about Shemar Chodesh Aviv. Hold on to the Yontif of Pesach as we've explained. Okay, so far we have explained all of the background to this. Now we're going to see the next paragraph on the next page, and then we'll end for tonight, because everything that we said astronomically, the chinuch is going to run through here briefly. So we'll see inside. There's Mishorshim. But it's always good to have thoughts, rationale, ideas behind this mitzvah. So the Jewish people should keep to the Moedim in their right time. That's the reason for this mitzvah. The Rebbe Shalom wants us to have Pesach when the Tvua is ba'aviv, when the Tvua is young, right? When the grain is sprouting. Watch over the spring festival and make Pesach. And Sukkot has to be at the harvest. Is a harvest festival. That's the end of the year, right? The end season of the year. If not for having leap years, you would end up with a wandering Pesach, right? Every year Pesach would be at a different time. Because the Jewish people work out our calendar year is based on the moon. Shehem. Now this is the astronomy. This is the astronomy in Gematria. Shehem. Shin Nun Daled, that's 354 Yom days. Ches Shaos, 8 hours. And Taf Ayin Vav Chalakim. What's that? 876 Chalakim. When you hear the Gabbai in Shul say, the Molad will be at this time, this amount of hours and this amount of Chalakim, that's a Chelek. An hour is broken into 876 Chalakim. Now, where we get that calculation from, not for now. But that's how Chazal understood the breakdown of an hour. Meaning we have minutes and seconds. They have Chalakim. Right? 886 Chalakim. Vihi chasera mishnas achama yud yomim, and it is a smaller amount than the solar year by 10 days. Yud yomim chaf aleph shos 21 hours, reish daled chalakim, and 204 chalakim. And you remember this with a mnemonic: Siman Yud chaf aleph reish daled. Right? That's the differential. That's the delta. The delta is 10 days, 21 hours, and 204 chalakim, which means that we need to correct for that delta. It says, but the seasons, as Sam pointed out, is solar. Nimtza she'ilulei hebrew, if not for the ibur she'anu mashvim by shnais halavanu b'shnais hachama, if not for the fact that we correct so that the solar cycle and lunar cycle are going to fit in with each other. You would not have Pesach in the spring and Sukkot in the fall. You wouldn't have it. V'nizkan hadav le'asos b'gdal adar. It has to be done b'gdal adar. Yeah, you need big Talmid Chachamim to do this. Lefi shehu inyan chachma gedala, because you need a doctorate in mathematics in order to figure out all of this stuff. Gam yomru ki mimenu yivada mikra ashana b'tvuos, and from this you will also know what's happening with the crops. You'll be able to keep track of all of these things. Ve'ein ro l'masor el l'gedolim chasidim, and you can only give this to gedolim and chasidim, people that are both very smart and also are righteous, are pious, meaning they're not going to mess with the calendar. Because if you have control over people's time and you're a bad dude, that's very bad, right? So sometimes the Gemara is explained like they would make a Shana Mu'aberes because they saw that the crops weren't growing soon enough and they needed an extra month of winter. So they would make an Ibur Shana. And this was done, in theory, not quite on the fly, but on the fly. You could make the determination to add an extra Adar throughout Adar. You'd be like, no, we're not ready for Pesach yet. It's not yet spring. You can push it off, which has massive economic ramifications. Right? Like the Grove wouldn't be able to handle this. Like, no, this year, Pesach's a month later. What do we do with all the Kosher Pesach stuff now that we've just stocked ourselves, right? This is complicated. But Lemaisa, everything that we said in terms of the physics and astronomy, the Sefer HaChinuch just summed up here. And we'll go into more of these details, Dinei HaMitzvah and the Minchas Chinuch next week. Shkoyach.